Well, hey there, you're on the internet, I have some free time, and welcome to the Triple N Network, where all you new medium nerds can find all the news you'll need. Let's look at an ink today, shall we? Now, today's ink is by K.W.Z of Poland. The entire line of inks was provided by the wonderful, original, mysterious benefactor. So if you're thankful for these reviews, send him some appreciation. Today's ink is one of their Iron-Gall inks. Now, they have a very wide range of Iron-Gall inks, K.W.Z does. I think they have at least 20, I believe. This is Iron-Gall Blue number 1. And yeah, so let's get into it. Now, I have a video that provides a bit more information about what Iron-Gall is or means, how it works, the significance, the dangers, quote-unquote. And if you'd like more of that information, I do recommend you go and find my K.W.Z Iron-Gall Gold, I believe. I will try to remember to provide a link down below if you'd like to find it there. That has a bit more, and that also has links to more academic sources, videos, if you'd like to find those. So this is mostly just going to be talking about the ink, assuming you know a little bit about it, and if there's anything I say that confuses you, please go check out that video. It might even be in the sidebar alongside this video, but yeah, so here we go. This is Iron-Gall Blue number 1 by K.W.Z of Poland. The two pens I used were these. This is a Pilot 78G. It is a single broad, but both the single and double broads of the 78Gs are actually stubs. Now, these stubs are essentially identical to the stubs you'll find on a Plumix, except they're gold-colored-ish, because they're not made of gold, I can promise you that. And this is a Kaweco Sport, and this one has a broad nib. Those were the two pens that I used. Okay, get over here. Alright, we're going to look at some comparisons. And some of these comparisons are going to be just by color and not by trait, because Iron-Gall is an ink type that has different traits. One of them is water resistance and things like that. So not all of them are going to have the same water resistant properties or whatever. So, but of course we're going to start with one that kind of does. Now, this is this might be the only bottle of Iron-Gall that I own. This is Chesterfield's Archival Vault, which is actually just a rebottled Diamine Registrar's ink. Who is calling me? I'm ignoring that. Anyways, as you can tell, quite similar. They have hints of blue, but they're mostly dark, intense gray. Shading, they do have similar properties because they're both Iron-Gall, but let's also check out another one. This is K.W.Z's Iron-Gall Blue number 2. Actually, are these all Iron-Gall? No, they're not. So this is Iron-Gall 1, this is Blue 1, this is Blue 2. As you can tell, Blue 2 actually has a lot more blue in it. The blue that's in Blue number 1 is much more subtle. Blue number 2 is a bit more noticeable. Another K.W.Z Iron-Gall. This is Blue number 4, which, if anything, is actually more gray. Yeah, so again, all of these have Iron-Gall properties, so I haven't tested all of those though yet. But and then the last one I have, which is not an Iron-Gall, is actually Diatramentus Scented Frankincense, which is just a gray. But it was the closest non-Iron-Gall gray I had that wasn't Diamine Gray or Silver or Lexington by Noodlers. So yeah, there you go. There are your comparisons. Now, we're going to look at some chromatography, and bear with me while I zoom in, because it is never graceful. Now, we have 3 today, because I tend to do this with Iron-Gall inks. Now, you're only really supposed to do chromatography like this. This is the standard one where you put the line of ink and then pretty much instantly dunk it in the water. And the thing is, a lot of times chromatographies can reveal the behavior of an ink, and usually more water-resistant inks, the way that Iron-Galls are mostly known for being, they behave very differently. Here you can see where that initial line was put. You can see some of it fighting going up, but a lot of it does move. Usually when there's an ink that has water resistance, more stays. So here, I let this one dry, as I normally let them dry, which means that I put the line of ink on all of these, instantly dunk this in the water, and then when this test dried, which is usually about 10, maybe 15 minutes, I dunk this one. And you can see there's a difference just between 10 or 15 minutes. You can see the dot got darker, less is flowing upwards. Now you see this, like, it almost looks like dirty, creamy color. That is quite literally, this doesn't show up for about a day, and then it slowly darkens, this bit right here. That is the water in the water test, in the chromatography test, reacting to the little bits of iron that it's pushing up. This is rust, essentially. And that's also what it is here. But if we look at this, now this was allowed 24 hours to dry, and I just want to show you the difference between this and this, but also this and this. The dot got much darker. This is much more what we would expect to see in a chromatography for a water-resistant ink. The dot is severely dark, very little color is being pushed upwards, and a lot of times with water-resistant inks, the water will continue much, much further after the dye stops, as we see here, because the dye stops and then we have this dirty sort of cream color going up. Yeah, so, yeah, that's the chromatography. It's kind of interesting. As you can tell, there's a good bit of blue, but the blue is sort of staying down there, so, yeah. Now, want to do some quote-unquote chemical tests. So this was allowed to dry, I think, for about 3 hours, I believe. Usually I write a note, but there isn't one. Now you can see the pattern of the smear of the ink, and you can see how that same pattern continues here, and you can see where it was densest, where the most ink was put down. That's where the most remains, but that blue stuff got washed away. So not all of this ink is completely waterproof. Now, 1/3 bleach solution actually didn't move much. It removed the blue, but you can see much the same. The pattern of the dense parts of the ink remain, and as you might be able to tell, it changed color. It sort of gained that dirty cream color, and that's because bleach is an oxidizer, which forces that rusting reaction that is what makes Iron-Galls water resistant. Now, ammonia pen flush did much the same thing, except it didn't change the color of the blue, just sort of washed it away and only the gray remains. And hydrogen peroxide actually had a pretty profound effect on it. I was not expecting this. It really changed colors. It actually got it to break up a little bit, so that was weird. Now, onto the paper test. Top down in density, Clairefontaine 90 grams per square meter. Now, Iron-Gall inks are very dense inks. They have a lot of stuff in them. So they can take a while to dry. So these dry times really don't surprise me. That single broad stub, the 78G, took 20 seconds. But that broad Kaweco took 27. But I also want you to see this lovely shading, because that is something that we often get from Iron-Gall inks, is they do give us very intense shading, and where it's laid on heaviest, it can turn almost black. Because most Iron-Gall inks, and this one was included, when you first write down with it, it is so watery and thin and pale looking. It looks like the most undersaturated ink you've ever seen. But then as it's seeping into the page, it gets darker, and then over the next day or two, it continues to get darker. So I actually didn't know that it was going to get this dark, and in fact, when I remember testing it back in April, I didn't remember it being this dark, and that's because over time, it continues to sink in, it continues to mature and get darker. And as I say here, this is essentially what Diamine's Prussian blue wishes it looked like, because God, my Diamine Prussian blue is undersaturated. And I also find it kind of ironic, because the Prussian blue test is to check for heavy metal poisoning, and this has, you know, metal in it. But anyways, there's no bleed, no feather, no spread, no echo, no sheen, all good in that regard, very well behaved. Now, I did something a little different with this water test. Now, I did this test the way I normally do, and let all the tests sit for about 15-20 minutes, and I did the water test. And I did this test on April 9th, 2016, and that is the result I got washing this when it only had about 20 or 30 minutes to seep into the page. This I did today. So this had 4 months to dry, and I just want you to see how much darker and clearer and more crisp that is compared to that. This is what I mean by it needs to mature. Kind of like with a Noodler's black ink, people think, oh, it's bulletproof as soon as it's dry, it'll never release from anything. No, it takes time for it to bond with the paper, and the more time you give it to bond, the better results you're going to get. So here, the blue did wash away, but what's there is absolutely clear, dark, and doesn't move. In fact, here, this corner right here is all of the ink I sopped up from all 7 tests. All of it is right there. And you can barely see it. So yeah, very little released. Now, next up is Fabriano Eco Qua. It's an 85 gram per square meter paper. It's very lovely. It's probably my favorite paper to write on. Now, that single broad stub in the 78G took 17 seconds to dry, and that broad Kaweco took 23. And again, we have beautiful shading, wide breadth of shading. I mean, you can see in some parts of the scrubby where it gets nearly black, and some parts where it's sort of a hazy gray. Very lovely. And again, when you're first writing with this, it goes on so thin and watery looking. So it's kind of fun watching it change on the page. But yeah, I see here lots of shading, especially in the broad. Like you see this writing right here, you can see all the different hues or values, I guess. But yeah, very well behaved, no bleed, no feather, no spread. I say maybe there's some echo in the scrubby, and that's entirely possible because I was laying it on very heavily to see how dark I could get it, and to see if there might be any sheen. Now again, this water test, this I did the day of the test. It had maybe 30 minutes to dry, and you can see it's still pretty clear, still pretty dark, very visible. Didn't feather, didn't explode. But here, when we look at this, after it was given 4 months, how much darker and clearer it is. Give it time. Now, next up is Rhodia, 80 grams per square meter. Yeah, it's kind of more of the same. It's got this nice sort of like deep, steely gray, intense storm cloud color. There's not a lot of blue, admittedly, but still. That 78G took 17 seconds. That broad Kaweco took 21. Really isn't too bad. And again, we get that lovely, lovely shading all throughout. And I'd say this ink actually is slightly wet flowing, which is not always easy in an Iron-Gall ink to get, you know, an ink that has bits of iron in it to flow through certain feeds. But this one behaved very well, was doing quite nicely, and it was even flowing a bit wet. Now there is no bleed, no feather, no spread, no sheen. I say maybe there's some echo in the scrubbies, but now that I turn it over I can't really see it. But maybe that's the quadrilateral paper, but I doubt it. Now here I forgot to do the separate test. So all of this was washed after it had maybe 30 minutes to seep in. This, I made this special. This is what it looks like when you give it 4 months. And again, you can see how much darker and clearer it is, how much less of it decided to just leave. Did very well. I'm telling you, if you let Iron-Gall have just a little while to mature, it will seriously impress you. Now, next up is Tomoe River paper. Now, this is a cream color paper, and it is extremely thin, and it tends to bring out shading and sheen and dry times and echo, because there's just something about the way this paper works, and it did certainly draw out the dry times. That 78G took 24 seconds, and that broad Kaweco took 33. However, here we get an intense breadth of shading. You can see how light it gets in the scrubby, and also how dark it gets. I just want you to see the, I don't know, something about the, I don't know, the fluidity of the shading is really beautiful on here. Looks very, very good. I put my thumb in that. That was human error. But yeah, I mean, it's quite beautiful looking. Looks very good on here. Now, there's no bleed, no feather, no spread. There is some echo, though, because this paper is just so darn thin. And this ink gets very, very dark. And the way Iron-Gall works, because it's iron and gallic acid, so the acid helps the ink sink into the paper, and then the iron reacts to the water in the ink and the paper and the air, and it rusts, essentially. And so that bonds the iron to the paper. And so in order for this to work the way it's supposed to, literally, it's got to sink into the paper. So the fact that it is aggressively sinking itself into the paper is how it works. But it never comes out the back. Now, I want you to imagine that like the paper is like this thick, you know, as if we're looking at it like this way from the side. The ink is going to seep in, which means it's closer to the back, which means it's easier to see. So yeah, if you're very sensitive to echo and you're writing with a broad and it's wet and you want to like see this crazy shading, if you're super sensitive to echo and show through, you might want to find alternatives. However, for how good this looks, I'll take it. But yeah. Anyway, so there is some echo, something to be aware of. Now, this paper loves to let ink slide away when you add water. And honestly, I was expecting it to let more slide away after only 20 or 30 minutes, but you can see it got much lighter. My dog is angry. It got much lighter, but it is very clearly there, and it is absolutely readable. It didn't freak out. Then we look here, which I did today, and look how absolutely clear it got. I mean, it is almost black. It did not get lighter at all. Heck, it almost looks like it got darker. I'm telling you, the key is maturity. Now, for the next 3 tests, I only used that pilot with the 78G with the single broad nib, except to write the name. And this is the world's worst 20-pound copier paper. In fact, it might very well be the worst paper I've ever encountered, and that is seriously saying something. So we're going to see some awful, awful behavior, and that really shouldn't surprise anyone. Because it's a fairly aggressive ink. It is acid, it is iron, it is a very crappy kind of paper all on its own. So when we see here just how much the line width increased, we really shouldn't be that shocked. Now, admittedly, a lot of times Iron-Galls behave very well with cheaper papers. The fact that it didn't with this paper doesn't shock me because it is that awful. Now, as you might be able to tell, there is no shading left at all, or at least it's like 98% gone, as I say here. But we do get an intense woolliness and a feathering and spread. It's kind of gross looking. I was not expecting results this bad, but once I saw them, I was like, yeah, no, if anything would do it, it would be this paper. Now, it took 5 seconds to dry, or I should say sink in. And we do have a good bit of bleed. But it's not huge bleed. It's mostly just little dots. But still, that's more than you'd like to see. However, this is a fairly wet flowing ink. And this is just awful, awful paper. Now, let's check out the water test. And this is exactly the situation where Iron-Gall is kind of like in its element. You know, this is very absorbent paper, so it's going to let that acid and that iron sink in, and then it's going to let it bond, and it's not going to want to let go. And again, water, of course, contains oxygen. It's hydrogen and oxygen. So when you add that to iron, you're going to help force that reaction of the rusting. It's going to help provoke the bond between the iron and the paper. So the fact that this had, 20 or 30 minutes and we got such a good result, you can see it's very clear, very there, didn't feather, didn't explode. That's actually exactly what Iron-Gall is admired for. Cheap paper, quick bonding, very good. But here, we see what happens after 4 months. Look at how dark it is. Look at how clear it is. Even more readable. Very nice. Now, next up is Mead Notebook Paper. This is very common for school children in the United States. This is the kind that you would find in a composition notebook. So the kind that you'd have in like a lab notebook. It feels like newspaper. And this is physically thinner than 20-pound paper. And if you've ever tried to, do the crossword on your local newspaper with a fountain pen, yeah, you know what a disaster that is. That's because it's large pulp paper, which means that the fibers they mash into paper are larger. However, this is what I mean by, usually Iron-Gall being in its element with cheap paper. Let's look at this. Am I right? It's pretty well behaved. We still have some shading. There's not a lot of feathering. We don't even have much woolliness. Very good. It's looking darn good. Took 4 seconds to dry. Really not bad. And let's look at the spread versus a 20-pound. You can see that got just ugly, just spread out here. We didn't have that. It looks very good. And look. Okay, so that's the edge of the page, and that is the broad nib. So we are getting some show through here, but look. That's not making it to the other side. I'm going to bring it in real close so you can see. There is nothing coming out the back. So it sunk into the paper, but then that was it. So yeah. Now, water test. Again, after 20-30 minutes, that looks darn good. And this paper can really freak out when you add water. But here, it didn't. Very clear, very there. Didn't feather, didn't explode. Then we look at here, where I got a couple extra months. even darker, even more clear. Like you can see the crispness of the lines in those X's. Very well done. Now, next up is Moleskine notebook paper, which is expensive, but horrible. And I hate this stuff. It is my nemesis. Someday I shall defeat it, but not today. Here it took 11 seconds to dry. Here we don't really get any good shading. The shading we do have is where the sort of paper started to freak out at the ink. Yeah. We have lots of feathering. We have lots of bleed. It's ugly looking. It is not, it's just bad combo. And then we get all this, where we get stuff coming out the back in the most random places, which I really can't explain, but I don't know. And then for the first time ever, we have a really weird water test. Now, again, this is the water test that got, 20, 30 minutes. It got lighter. It started to let go. It started to get woolly. It started to come apart. And then here, it got an extra 4 months. And it still kind of started to do that. Now, it is darker. It is more clear. It is less that, but it is something. So, I really hate Moleskine. And I feel like I don't have to explain why anymore, because, I mean, let's be real. So, yeah, there you go. There's K.W.Z's Iron-Gall Blue #1. It is very, very gray. It is a very, very gray blue. However, as an Iron-Gall ink, it does pretty well. It does its thing. And I also wanted to make this video with the extra test, just to show you what a difference more time can make. It may be subtle, but it's significant. So yeah, there you go. Again, if you want to learn more about Iron-Gall, look for my K.W.Z Iron-Gall Gold, and I'll try and remember to leave a link down below for your consideration from the Triple N Network. If you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you'd like to see more, please subscribe to the channel, and thanks for watching. Bye.